Welcome back to What Matters, a Black Lives Matter podcast. I'm your host, Ariel Robinson, and I'm joined by Dejanay Parker, Joshua Joseph, and Dr. Xavier Buck. We are members of the BLM community. We all know our education system needs an overhaul, but what are the solutions? Today, we begin by reflecting on the Black Panthers Oakland Community School, a visionary model for education established in 1973. This groundbreaking school pioneered an educational approach that went beyond the traditional academic subjects, embracing physical health, emotional well-being, and community engagement. Our elders and ancestors knew that true education was a holistic endeavor. Its commitment to providing free, nutritious meals inspired the National Breakfast Program we see in American public schools today. Additionally, the school's innovative use of meditation and mindfulness techniques for student well-being was well ahead of its time. As we discuss education in this episode, the Oakland Community School can serve as an important model. Its community-based approach can help bridge gaps between our current schools and neighborhoods. Its focus on culturally relevant curriculum addresses the current call for representation and engagement for today's students of color. Let's get into the episode.
Welcome back to What Matters. I'm Dejanay. I'm with JJ and Xavier. How you guys feeling today?
Good. Been here having a lot of conversations. Been very fun. But yeah, talking about important stuff.
I heard we talking about education.
Talking about education today.
And I heard you got a lot to say.
No, you're the doctor.
Exactly. This is your point today.
That just means I read books.
You're the self-educated, self-taught.
I feel like we're all specializing in this in different ways.
Come on, TikTok University.
Well, I'm excited to be in conversation with both of you all about something so important yet again. Xavier, so I know that you're based in Oakland, right? Could you tell us about the awesome history of Oakland Community School more in depth?
Absolutely. I'm the founder of the Black Panther Party Museum. And the first exhibition we did was about the Oakland Community School for the 50th anniversary of the party, of the school. And, this school existed from 1973 to 1982. It was one of 65 survival programs that the party put on. And it was in deep East Oakland, the middle of the hood. And it was an offshoot. At first, they had a school just for the Panthers kids, right? Because they were doing service sometimes 19-hour days. And so who was watching the kids, right? So they had something for that, and then they expanded it to the entire community. Now, a lot of people think that this school was about teaching Panther ideology, which they could have done, but it actually wasn't. It was about teaching the kids how to think, not what to think, about giving them a global worldview so that when they go out into the world, they can make decisions themselves. So some of the kind of earmarks of the school was they had meditation every single morning. They were fed 3 meals a day. They didn't have grades. They actually, if say you were good in language arts, but you were average in math, you could move up in groups in what you were good at or stay average where you were, right? And so how they did the school was Erica Huggins, who was the director, and all the teachers, they reflected on what was their school experience back in the day, and what did they not want for themselves, right? What would they, if they were a kid again, what would they want to create? And so they had this model that they created in Oakland. It was beautiful. It won awards from the state of California. But unfortunately, it did dissolve in 82, and it was actually that the end of that program was the end of the Black Panther Party. Thankfully, just a few years later, there was actually another private school that popped up in deep East Oakland called Ile Omide. It's an Afrocentric school that still exists to this day, 40-year history. And some Panthers from the Oakland Community School carried over and helped them found that school. And so their legacy continues on, not just around the world, but even hyper-locally in Oakland.
So because of the execution of the Black Panther Party, did that default into the school ending?
Yeah, well, the end was sad, right? The end was sad, but we're talking about an end after the federal government created a program called COINTELPRO to disrupt, destroy, and discredit Black leaders, specifically every single Black Panther. It was after they incarcerated them. It was after they had assassinated 32 Panthers. It was after they had flooded our communities with drugs. There were a lot of issues. There were a lot of attacks on the Black Panther Party. So, it was sad. There was some kind of mismanagement at the school, and it did dissolve, but the model that they created didn't. and yet a lot of people don't know it, right? There's no book that goes in depth about what the Oakland Community School was. And so at the Black Panther Party Museum, we try to fill in those gaps with our exhibition, and we bring in a lot of educators and students to reflect on their experiences and where we go from here.
One thing that you made hit on was they did it because of what they didn't have, right? And what they wanted their children to have. What was your all's experience like in education?
I think for me it was because I'm still technically like in schooling now, and I at least throughout high school, because I've been in public school my entire life, and for my experience it was kind of like, I think the more value I pulled in school was being able to have that like community, being able to talk to like people, especially of my same like demographic, being able to learn about different aspects of socialization and culture that I didn't get in my own household, because I have like a very unique like Black experience when it comes to the diaspora, my parents both being immigrants. So all the stuff that I like learned in like common like parlance, like different terms I use and everything, a lot of it stems back from just learning and hearing that stuff as a kid in classrooms. When it comes to the actual educational content, I feel like I was able to shape like rudimentary skills that you need now, like doing math, like being able to read and have like critical thinking when thinking about like passages in textbooks and stuff. But I feel like a lot of my global like experience and knowledge and a lot of my more substantive stuff that I talk about now came from just me having that thirst for knowledge and wanting to learn all that stuff. Like I feel like I was always a kid who was very good in school, and I could get good grades, but it was just I would only get good grades if it was something that I wanted to learn. Like I was never really the best kid at math or the best kid at like physical science or whatever. But you put me in history and social studies, I'm like that all the time, because those were stuff that I was actually really dedicated to doing. So I was able to have like some decent like teachers along the way that really helped me expand that knowledge. But I also do think there was a lot of oversights, a lot of stuff that you don't learn, a lot of stuff that happens in the world and in the Black community and our history that doesn't get like covered enough. And I feel like that was just, I don't know, I feel like I know a lot of people whose experience is similar to that, where it's like, it's not that you didn't learn anything in school. You got a lot of tools that you needed to, but there's a lot more stuff that you find out through life and through like learning a lot of stuff on your own that you're like, oh, damn, I wish they would have taught me this in school.
Let me put it this way. I grew up in California public schools, and when they started banning Black history all across the South, I was like, y'all had Black history to begin with? So I was kind of shocked by that. The only time I learned about Black history for real, like in 5th grade, they brought us all into an auditorium, sat us down, crisscross applesauce, and they did a slideshow, a PowerPoint, and it showed like all these images about slavery. And then like, I went to a diverse school, and like all the Black kids, we started looking at each other. We said, hold up. Like, all our heads looking back and forth. We're like, that's us, right? I remember like storming out the auditorium just like mad. Cause I was like, yo, that's what they did to us. You know what I mean? There was no like afterwards people talking to us about like the impact this is gonna have on us. No, so I just went to the library at the school, found the blackest book I could possibly find, and it was a book of Black poetry. Had a lot of Langston Hughes in there, and then that became like my first time to be interested in Black history and stuff. But this is also the same school. In 3rd grade, they had me come home to my parents and tell them I'm gonna be a Republican.
Oh yeah,
come on,
Talk about indoctrination.
In 3rd grade,
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense. So
I feel like there was a lot of, I feel like my biggest thing was there was a lot of lack of giving you those tools that you really need and that knowledge that you really need to function. Because I feel like even I grew up in an area where it's like I've been in Illinois my entire life, and northern Illinois for that matter, because a lot of it's just cornfields, but like the northern part, and like a lot of the Black students there, like they don't have that much of a thirst for like knowledge about Black history or care that much in depth about it. They focus on either whatever athletic they doing or like trying to maintain a relationship with like everyone else in the school, because like your social, like your clout or whatever. There was not really like y'all, we had this like collective experience, we should probably like talk about this. It was just kind of like you focus in the day-to-day of being like a student. And even when I went to high school, it was a lot of that same way. It was like I was one of the kids who stuck out because I was the one who was talking about these issues and advocating. I started doing TikTok or whatever, and I stuck out because like people don't do that usually. And I feel like and it was a predominantly Black school, so it was a super like jarring experience to be like, oh yeah, like we should probably all be at least somewhat clued up. But I think in a positive sense, a lot of those same people like now turn to me as someone who's like, okay, I get my information from that person. So I guess it's kind of like a give and a take.
Yeah. You guys both brought up something in education. Inherently, you brought up Black history, right? And I learned all my Black history at home. So my mom was always clear that of the system that we were living in, and she taught us that at a very young age. And I feel like it's so important for us to know that the oppressor is not going to teach us about how the oppression that they have us under, right? So if we want to educate ourselves and liberate ourselves, and really it's like liberating our minds, we have to begin educating at home too about these things that you're talking about Black history, right? We have to teach our children that at home, because as we see, the system is not built for that, and then also they're doing everything that they can to make sure that it's not taught in school. So I'm interested to learn more models that we can take away from the Oakland community.
I was gonna say, I mean, just the idea that it's a community school, meaning that the teachers and the administrators and the parents and the students are all in constant communication with each other. So say when grades are coming and, you don't just give an A, B, C, or D. It's like, no, go talk to the parents and see what's been going on in their household this year. Like, let's ask the kids, have them give input on their grades, right? And on actually the education system they're receiving, have them shape what they're supposed to be getting there, right? That's completely different than what we have today. We have standardized tests. It's a universal curriculum across the entire nation, and then a little bit more on the state level. But, there's very few options where kids have the option to shape what they're supposed to be learning. Like, just imagine that, right? And we don't
input into say, I'm struggling, or I don't understand this, without feeling like, oh, well, you can't read.
Yeah, or say a parent is having trouble with their taxes every year because we don't learn how to do taxes. The parents can come to the school and say, hey, my kids should be learning taxes because I'm struggling with this now. And maybe we can learn at the same time. It's just stuff like that.
I think that would be a help, because it also it can also break down that barrier. One of the things that you touched on when it comes to that model of the Oakland Community School, it's like you understand that even there are times in the home environment where people feel scared. I remember growing up, I didn't want to come and tell my mom that I got an F in the class, or oh, let me see that report card if there's bad grades on it. But it's if you have that communal aspect, you're able to look into it, and that it's not just a letter on a card. It's okay, they might be doing bad, but that doesn't mean that they're less deserving or they're just not good at that topic. Maybe it's the way that they're learning it. Maybe it doesn't have to be as standardized. Maybe that there's...
You know how many red slips I hid from my parents?
Oh my gosh. Well, it got to a point where I was so happy when my mom stopped asking me about it, because it was overall I was doing good. But if I was doing bad in the class, I'm yeah, you're not gonna you're not gonna see that, because I just didn't. So it's being able to have that environment at the home can really be influenced by stuff like school if we think about it differently. If it's there's that pathway, it's okay, we both can discuss in a non-negative or antagonistic way, what is it can we do to do better and give yourself the tools to succeed more in that aspect. I think that's something that can be brought to the education system to make it less standardized and one size fits all.
It was so interesting for me. In school, I always struggled with math and science, right? And I feel this is the way you're taught. And math and science is a privileged thing, to be able to have that. If it's in my mind, it comes from STEM, right? Those are levels of, you need extra things to know to learn that. And so it wasn't until I had a teacher who really took the time to teach things differently and to work with you, right? And to really explain things. I was with math, for example, as well, right? When they teach you everybody learns differently. So you can't just put a problem on the board. You have to have, like you said, levels of where the school is working with the parents and so the parents could work with the students at home, or there's an opportunity for everyone to learn, because it's constant. Education is constantly changing. And so how do you need to keep the parents informed so that they feel equipped to even teach their kids? Because what I learned is a lot of times if you don't know something, how can I help? And as a parent, it makes you feel inadequate when you're oh man, this is a math problem. This looks like a different language. Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm not even gonna ask you about your grades anymore.
Exactly.
I don't know what you're learning anyway. So.
And I think that giving the tools for parents to teach their kids stuff outside the home, it can apply to so many things. At least in my household, I didn't grow up in a political household. My mom is Christian, and that's probably one of the only value systems she tried to pass on with me. But for me, she didn't keep me up to date about any history stuff with having to do with Jamaica or having to do with Black people in the United States. I was kind of a blank slate in that regard. So I was really the first in my family that hammered down and learned a bunch, so much stuff about what's happening in the state of Black people in the United States and just globally, that when I was able to convey that to her, she's learned so much more through me or whatever, having that ability. So whether it's being learned enough to give that knowledge to your children or just having them be a blank slate and being that open communication where it's like, oh, I learned this thing. Is this true? What do you think about this thing? That can like empower so many students to have that like openness and to have that success, because I feel like there is not one way to think about it. And I think that, like, I remember you were touching on like within the school system and having that ability to like have that connection between parents. Well, it doesn't need to be like okay, I'm choosing one or the other. I'm removing my kid from the school I'm doing at homeschool. It's like, no, stuff like the internet helps teach your kid along with you or along with the teacher and everything. It's like there needs to be that communication, I believe, for education.
I mean, my parents had to be at the school all the time. Like, I remember by the time I got to high school, they tried to test me into Algebra 1. I'd already taken it in middle school. But it was where all the black and brown kids were. Very diverse, the most diverse high school in LA County. But it was still segregated within the school. So all the black and brown kids were in that lower math class. And I remember the first day, this white male teacher, old guy, he gonna say, write down. He said, first of all, you guys are here because you failed everywhere else in life. That's why you're in my class. So I want you to take out a piece of paper and write where you're gonna be 1 day from now, 1 week from now, 1 year from now. So I wrote every single line getting out this class. You know what I mean? And so my parents advocated so that I would have to retest to try to get into the next class. I passed by 1 point. I was never a good tester, but it didn't mean I couldn't rise to the occasion if I was put in the class. So I get into the class, it's mostly Asian and Latino students, and there was no support from the teachers. The teacher actually discouraged me from math and science, even though those were my best subjects my entire life. I wanted to be an engineer. And where there was encouragement was the social sciences and language arts. And that's where I then leaned to, right? But I could have been everything I imagined. But that school system spit me out in a way where it told me, defer your dreams.
Yeah, and so that's what you're hitting on, is something so important, which is advocating, right? We have to be advocating for our kids in schools. We cannot expect for the schools to have our children's best interests at heart. Like, we have to be the ones that are going and advocating for them to have the right education, to be uplifted, to be able to learn, right? To be in a space to learn. That's what you go to school for. We're not going to school to be condemned. We're not going to school to be told that we're here because we failed. And so really, I think what we're hitting on, it's a responsibility. It starts at home. The education responsibility truly starts at home, and being open to what we know, what we don't know, and learning together.
And I think that's like, it continues at home too, because like even with public school, I know especially what's been going on. So if I were to give like a tip for like black families or whatever, because we know that like especially white rural conservative families are very active in their kids' education, and it's not that they're just active in their kids' education, they're active in your kids' education too, because they will be the ones at them school board meetings being oh, we gotta have this taught in the school, even though there's no basis for nothing, and they don't know better than anybody else you walk past on the street, but they just feel very strongly that their kid needs to not be learning this and be learning that because someone told them that. So especially if you're armed with the facts and what history has actually happened on your side, you have to be proactive in that regard. It is very hard to fit like into your schedule to be like, let me go to the school board meeting, but your advocacy is going to speak for the education for kids you don't know, that you do know, and your own kid. And that's like one of the things where it's like, as opposed to other systems where you don't have as much leeway, y'all need to constantly press on this, because that is, if there is going to be like a one size fits all thing, you have to do whatever you can to like shape it and be able to like, all right, cool, add this in, take this out. You have to be as antsy as they are about it, because they realize it starts with the kids. Kids are the next generation. If they can get them to believe whatever bullshit they want to believe, well, then we don't got to do no work for the next 50 years. That's the whole like playbook. So we have to constantly be on that.
Yeah. So what are ways that we're seeing education being reinvented?
You know it.
You want me to take that one?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, in my household, the one I grew up in, right, the best education I got was growing up on Toni Morrison and James Baldwin and Amiri Baraka and all these black literary scholars, right? But nowadays, like, I just taught myself how to make a AI chatbot by using ChatGPT, right? Like, literally, we have all this technology at our fingertips. We can learn how to do anything. It's not just about writing emails, right? It's also about, like, what can we invent? What businesses can we create? How can we connect with one another through this new technology? So I think that's an interesting kind of breaking ground. I don't know what's going to turn out with that side of things, but
how do we think that, you bring up technology, I'm just curious, how do we feel that technology is moving so fast and it's expensive. And so how do we keep our children from being left behind when it comes to technology and being able to stay in the game?
That's why I love like a community focus on that, because even with like the prices of like stuff like phones and laptops continuously like escalating each year, I think that's why there always needs to be a very good like public library that has like laptops and that has computers and stuff that you can go out that's not that far away from you, because I feel like technology is one of those ways that education is being revolutionized. Like I taught myself, like I was talking about how I was usually like very good in school, but almost everything that I'm applying now is something that in the midst of me doing that school, I was learning because I had the passion to learn it. Like politics, history, Black culture, everything was like where my thing was. Like obviously math, science, I can do that and get the grade. But outside of school, the stuff that I was learning was all of this stuff. And I'm able to directly apply it to the world now. So I think that, and the way I got that is because I can take some spare time, look up something, or I watch a video where someone said something I don't believe in, or I think they was lying. I can go on Google, I can Google it, I can fact check my sources and stuff, just because that technology is right there. And you'd be surprised what you can learn, what you can do, and what you can apply when that's the case, because we still have like a lot of prevailing narratives where it's like if you don't go to college, or if you don't go to or if you don't do well in high school, you are like a failure. You're a bad student. You might just need a different avenue to learn. And especially when you have that technology right at your fingertips, you can teach yourself so much stuff on TikTok, on YouTube. I changed a carburetor because I'm up north and it was snowing and my snowblower was broken and I was wondering why it wasn't starting. So I like Googled what could be the problem or whatever. And it was like, oh, the fuel line, you got to change the carburetor. I taught myself how to change the carburetor. I'm not a mechanic. I don't know how engines work. But like there's so many things that you can learn and engage in. And I feel like just giving people that accessibility is always needed. That's why
and that's the thing. We're in the information age. So knowing how to think now, what thing is the most important thing.
Exactly.
And what to know what's credible and what's not.
Yep.
Know if we're looking at fake news. Right? Like those are the most important skills. We have everything at our fingertips, but we have to have an idea of what we're looking up, right? What to even search for.
That was one of the most substantive things I learned my first year at university was like we had a seminar, like a class where we just sat in and then we went to the library, and then the librarians that were talking about like, okay, if you want to find a source or whatever, here's how you look up the media bias of this website. Here's how you check these sources. That was one of the most substantive things I ever learned in my entire years of schooling, because a lot of people just look up what confirms their worldview already and let their biases. You can
find that on Google, and that's what I always love to say with Google is like you could Google search anything and get the answer you're looking for. It's all about how you look it up. If you put something in Google and you're looking for a certain answer, you will find it. But if you actually are trying to learn, then it's what you're looking for at that point. Right. You're trying to learn. And so, like you said, to know how and what, and then also to know what resources to use. What other platforms do you guys like to use to do research
Google
on?
Scholar, JSTOR, WorldCat.
There's a few others I keep forgetting. There's one that starts with an E, but like literally, even if you go on Google Scholar, they will take you like Sage Journals. They will take you to
journals and to actual factual.
And then and then you can look up like media bias fact check or whatever that can tell you the leanings of like given publications. Like you want to stay like close to things like an AP or whatever and away from stuff like New York Post because the slant, and then like ABC and CNN stuff. You can see the slant in those. Just having like Media Fontes, I believe, is another one that you can check what bias is in the news source, because a lot of people have that first interaction with news. And even if you find like a headline on Instagram or social media, being able to like retype in that headline.
Look it up, not just seeing a headline on social media and then like, oh, it's facts. Like you have to go and do research. Always do your own research.
That's all forms of learning and education that like, especially if we have as much access as we do now, because before, if it wasn't in the book, you're not finding it. And even if you could get the book, because they'll probably just take the book away from you.
Yeah, there's that. How do the integrations of schools impact our school system today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting. A lot of people look at integration, and I hear all the time Black folks saying, this is what destroyed Black education. It was integration. Like this was a bad thing. And in many ways, the way America did it was. When integration happened after Brown v. Board of Education, it wasn't white kids going into the Black schools. It was Black kids going into the white schools. They closed our schools. Black high schools became Black junior high schools. They fired 100,000 teachers across America, Black teachers, right? And so it was a detriment to us, But imagine if integration looked like white kids moving into our schools and learning Black history. Imagine how that would have changed America and changed the fabric of our country. But the way we did it, it hurt us a lot.
There was a name, I forget the name of the case, but there was a case immediately following Brown v. Board where essentially the Supreme Court had to step in because there were a bunch of riots and protests, and they're like, no, the Black kids are not coming to our schools. And that was the following Supreme Court case they had to make like the next summer, where they were like, you have to listen to Supreme Court orders because this is outrageous. Like, we gave y'all the rationale for why Brown v. Board is unconstitutional, and y'all in response have been like, nah, we're just not going to listen, because they were that like adamant that they did not want people of a different skin color in the same schools as them. So the Supreme Court had to step in again and see to it that those schools actually got desegregated. And the reason why that messes up the whole paradigm of integration, because people think about it as just like, okay, there was segregation, then everybody came together. No, Black people came together under the purview of what white students were already being taught. And that's where you tell, because there were no like Black uprisings against white students having to come into our school, despite the fact that a lot of people were perpetuating that same violence. Ruby Bridges was trying to walk into school, they was holding up coffins and stuff and throwing stuff. Black people had every right to be angry. That didn't happen because Black kids were the ones who needed to be let into the white schools. So when you just take that, there was no like big paradigm shift in what books they were pulling from. We still have that same stuff from like, what is it, Houghton Mifflin or something? Like
their education.
Like in Texas, like school books, like the ways that they like disseminate all that information through. They're still like pro segregation, pro like
you got textbooks that call slaves volunteers.
Exactly.
And like Black parents had to come out and protest that.
Yeah, and they're talking about like, oh yeah, slaves were occasionally treated very well. Like this is the same playbooks.
Columbus found it.
Man,
this is the same like playbooks we're pulling from, because none of that really got fully addressed, because you saw what happened. States were fighting tooth and nail to make sure that stuff didn't get addressed. And I feel like we just kind of all forgot about it or whatever. And that's why I feel like the way that in which integration...
We didn't forget about it. They purposely didn't teach it to us,
exactly.
So we would have kind of this illusion that we had progress.
The way in which the integration was done, it was done in a purview of like, okay, we don't value the Black perspective, so we just gonna bring y'all here because, I mean, they said we have to, but we're not actually gonna value that perspective. How do we start valuing that perspective and making sure that those stuff are still being taught?
The only thing they value us as is labor. That's what they put us in them schools for, to spit us out and make sure we can work for low wages. That's what they want.
That's what the school system, that's when we got public school systems.
That part.
I feel like there's an approach that we need to take, because even we see the rolling back of teaching Black history or whatever. It's if you even got that interaction in the education system in general, they want to take that away.
And
so
I think
we
it's
have
the
to
rolling back of teaching Black kids.
Yeah, and
because we know that we're not learning about these things in elementary. We're not. Well, you different. Your school is different.
I don't like how I learned it.
It was rough. He was not learning that in my school.
Exactly. So we're learning about Christopher Columbus in young ages, right? We're learning their narrative, and so what we really see happening is trying to eliminate making school a privilege.
Yeah.
You know, can you test in to go to school? Can you pay $50,000 a semester for high school? That's what we're charging for private schools, right? And then, like I said, it's a narrative approach. So I used to go to school in a private school. And it was a religious private school. And by the time in 5th grade, I was so behind, I could barely read, count, do all the things that I needed to do, because all they wanted to do was teach me their indoctrination. I wasn't learning anything sufficient enough to make me be able to be an independent thinker in the real world. And so by the time I went to public school, I had to take 4th and 5th grade at the same time to catch up. Right. And so when I think about education, it really is about it really is on us as individuals to think about what we want our children, how we want our children to be able to show up into the world, the youth, the next generation, what we want to be equipped with to know, like, where is the world going? It's going into a technology world, right? And so how can we begin to start preparing our kids to be STEM ready? And even though we maybe not have the resources, right? Like you said, community, going to the library is so important. I look at libraries now and I'm like, forget that libraries exist. And they're so underfunded now because people are not using them. So it's like, let's start going back to our local libraries. My mom used to take us to the libraries all the time to read.
Yeah, I mean, I think And I think when you say that, I think a lot of people get embarrassed when we look at statistics for the Black population, and it shows us with low reading and math scores. Like, it just does, right? And people get embarrassed about that. But people forget, like, when Huey P. Newton graduated from Oakland Technical High School, he couldn't read, right? The whole reason why they used so much art in the Black Panther newspapers because they knew the Black community wasn't a reading community.
We
right?
had to teach ourselves how to. It
Come
used to
on.
be illegal for us
When
to read.
there were
It's
still
been
segregated
punished.
water
Like you
fountains.
said, you've been taught that. You already failed. You don't know math.
So think
You
about
don't know.
this. What has happened in our education system for that to have ever changed?
Exactly.
Because I still got people, my family members, who graduated from high school and couldn't read in this day and age.
And that's
There's
why
not
it's
much
like
that's
we
changed.
can't count on them. We have to count on each other. We have to count on our community, right? And bring and start thinking about other ways. That is a tool to use, but it can't be the only way because at the end of the day, when we learned how to read, we were sitting in corners together, teaching each other how to read. And we have to get back to that, not condemning and saying, oh, you can't read. You know, we love to shut each other down.
We used to have
you don't
mobile
know how
libraries.
to do that. Yeah. And
like Delta Sigma Theta sorority, they had a mobile library they carried all around the South, just giving people books and teaching them how to read, like stuff like that. And they weren't the only organization doing it, but we used to do stuff like that.
Yeah,
we cared about literacy in our community. We cared about
'cause we
what
know
the next step
knowledge
was.
is power.
And I feel like that should be utilized. Like, there's no reason why stuff like that can't be happening, even if there's like a public school. You know that kids are going to that school or whatever. You know that kids are going to be in the community. That's where they all have to go. There should be that additional, like, all right, here's some supplemental education. Here's an easier access to that, because all those students might not be doing the best with that formula. So those schools are now forced to be like a part of our communities. They need to represent our communities. So if you're in like an area, especially a predominantly Black area, and there's worries about rolling back aspects of Black history or about how my student isn't doing that well, it's like, well, we live here. We need to be able to be like, all right, cool. This is what we need here. This is the rationale for what we need here. If y'all not going to change it, we're going to keep pressing you until you do exactly that thing, or we're going to do it ourselves. Because those things should also be extensions of the community. It shouldn't be like this high school is stand out and then everyone else just kind of live around it. That should be a part of that community. And I feel like there's not enough interaction on that level, at least from us and what we need to do, as opposed to like those people who be at the school board meetings talking about like, oh, the gay people's in the book, so it's a problem.
We still have
like,
a responsibility to ourselves to continue empowering ourselves. Because like I was saying earlier, if we are looking for them to educate us, we're just going to keep getting lies. We're going to keep being pushed into this school to prison pipeline. We're going to keep, that's what they're teaching us. So we have to teach ourselves the true history of, you know, where we come from, who we are, why the systems are the way they are. Teach ourselves how to read, encourage each other to, hey, you're struggling at school, let me help you, you know, or even as adults, I think we have to open up our minds, say we actually still have so much to learn because the system that we've been living in is only since, you know, the 60s when they did desegregation schools. That's not that long ago. Like, we have to give ourselves grace, but not shut down and say, oh, you know, I think, like you said, people get embarrassed. And so we have to remove the embarrassment and just have a will to want to continue to learn so that we continue to grow. And
I feel like that information, like, helps everybody too, because I feel like there's a lot of people who are convinced that like they can't hear the real history or they're not ready to hear the real history, and then that ideology gets passed down to their kids who grow on with like an ignorant mindset. It's like if you walk around the world knowing the history of what's happened to your neighbor or whatever, your neighbor's demographic, that enables you to be, I like the quote from MLK where he says a threat to justice, or injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, in a sense that like you need to know, you need to be an informed citizen just in general, but especially about the history of Black people, Indigenous people, Mexican people, to understand the racial dynamics of the country so that you can better operate in that framework. If you're gonna live there, you might as well know as a practicality. You don't even have to like drown yourself in every single problem. You just need to know in order to live your life to the fullest. So I think that like equipping ourselves and then helping to equip others who are gonna grow up in those same schools with us as a product of what we're left with, that is how you can overall improve that system, because like you're not going to get the real. You're not going to get the real if we keep doing this paradigm. And then even when you're not getting the real, they're still trying to take even that
stuff
away.
that doesn't even exist away before it exists. How can families take education to their own hands? I think we're hitting on it, but I love to just propose a question.
I mean, my only frame of reference, my dad did hooked on phonics flashcards with me every single day, right? They tried to get me to as best a school as they possibly could, but they also knew that every day when I came home from school, they're going to have to help me with my homework. My dad was like our informal tutor, right? We were going to do flashcards as often as possible. And that even that knowledge was not the only place we could learn, right? My dad was a musician, so I used to go on tour with him all around the country. And there was a lot to learn just being on a tour bus. My mom worked in higher ed at a university, so there was a lot to learn at the university level, just kind of hanging out around these administrators and faculty and students. When I was in high school, my sister was at Cal State Dominguez Hills taking Black Studies courses. So I was reading that material with her because she stayed home for college. So it was like, this is all supplement to what I was learning in the school system. You go through the school system to learn some knowledge and to learn how the system in America works. But there's a whole lot of knowledge we have in our community that we need to make sure gets shared from the elders on down. So it really just comes from how much can we share, what is important in our community to share, and how to prepare this next generation for whatever's coming their way.
My perspective on how families can take it into their own hands is two main things. One, encourage your children to like responsibly use social media. Whether it's a social media app, maybe it doesn't even need to be that. Just encourage them to, or teach them how to use technology properly. So whether that's teaching them how to find a source on Google or something, or to look up, make sure someone's not lying to you and everything. Because regardless, that's going to be an interaction point they're going to have almost every minute of every day at a certain point in their lives, depending on whenever you decide to buy them a phone or whenever they get their own phone, it's going to happen at a certain point when they're going to constantly be online, constantly be searching for stuff. So being equipped to go into that instead of like shielding them from it is something that I think that should be embraced. And even like, cause I know we talk a lot about our self-sufficiency, and there's just a fact that like a lot of people don't have a lot of time. They have to go to work, they have to make ends meet and everything. So we need to press for an expansion of after school programs. You have to. I like the idea that we had talked about before of like a 24-hour school. Not that you're learning for 24 hours, but that there's just a safe space for your children to be at, to interact, to do something, to like have a club and everything that they care about if you have to work late, if you don't have that. And if we don't have that right now, you need to take some of that time that you do have available to go to those school boards, to let y'all know, okay, this is something that we really need. Like, I don't know what resources we need to pull together, how we can work out this calculation for overtime. Y'all need to be paying these teachers more anyway. So let's figure out how to do that and then create that safe space so that at least there's a place where they're like, okay, they're going to be around the general vicinity of learning while I'm not there. And then when I come there and I have that time, I can teach them the real that I know, the real that I've experienced and everything. So that there's just that constant like fervor of being able to learn something. And I feel like that will help tremendously. There's a bunch of ways we need to start approaching stuff like that.
Yeah. I heard both of you say, and I agree, going and being involved, just being involved in your child's education, being involved, taking it seriously. It's so important that we take the youth in our community's education seriously, whether if you have children, if you don't have children, nieces and nephews. It's so important that we're encouraging our youth to read, to continue to read, because books are being banned. And that's for a reason. You know, they want us to be able to just text everything, know how to talk, but you don't know how to spell. You know, and so it's like so important to be able to still read books. You know, be able to teach that to the youth. I think to know how to read and to know how to write. You know, sit down and make sure that they know how to read and write, because one day we don't have technology and we might know how to go look something up.
And that's so pertinent, because like I'm not the biggest book reader, but like, please, if they're banning books, there's something in that book that they don't want you to find out. I've read To Kill a Mockingbird, and then I found out they trying to ban To Kill a Mockingbird. I know white people who I've gone to school with who read To Kill a Mockingbird and still came out on the other side as ignorant as could possibly be. There's no reality in which you're gonna read a book like that and then suddenly start like questioning everything. I feel so bad. They just scare you with that. What's in that book is very real themes that factually did happen all over the country at one point in time, and that can give you a context on how we got to here. If you have no idea of how we got to here, all you see is, oh, well, I'm in school with these people, that must mean that all the racism is gone. No, you have to be able to understand it's not just about like, oh, this person's now here with me. It's the ideas that people formed around those people that a lot of people pass down and still carry to this day. So being able to open that book, especially if they telling you shouldn't read it, we gonna ban it, there's something in there that they want you to not figure out. And you always have to dig for that, even if it's not at that point. Go find a PDF of it, listen to somebody else review it, something. You cannot let them shut that avenue down for you, because that's exactly what they've done before, except for they just wrote it down and was like, y'all can't read.
And if I could just bring it real back, just if we're thinking about self-determination, though, because we started out talking about the Oakland Community School, and it's important to say it was not a public school, it was not a charter school, it was a private elementary school. It was, yes, it was started by the Panthers, but a lot of community members were involved. They started with a small class, and they did charge tuition, $25. If there were folks who couldn't pay, they helped them out. But it was important to get the folks in the community invested in it.
$25 a year, $25.
$25 a year, yeah. And so it's just like you
that.
care
We
more
come
for something. Well, it's gonna cost more nowadays. When you're paying for something, you take care of it, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm saying a school is the easiest way for us to think about self-determination because it wraps our head around something that affects everybody in the community, right? And we get to choose what we're supposed to be learning to build whatever we're trying to build in our community, right? That's the starting point. So creating independent schools is extremely important, or supporting the ones that's already in your city. A lot of like Eli Omede's school that I was talking about earlier in Oakland, I mean, they get overlooked all the time, but all of their students are learning. There's an all-black school. It's pre-K through 8, and all their kids are learning 2 grade levels above the public school system in Oakland. They're thriving, and yet they have this small little building attached to a church and a small playground, and it's beautiful, but it's still could be much bigger, right? Come on. We have prototypes all around the country what independent schools for black kids look like. We need to invest in those and expand them and build out those campuses or start new ones in addition to them. We already have the model. We don't have to start from scratch.
And that's my thing, is that also keeping that in mind, just because it is black and centric around that does not mean you're going to be antagonized if you want to show up too. As long as you have an open perspective, you want to learn, that's all we asking for. Because at the end of the day,
history is true history.
Exactly, it's true history. And either way, regardless of, I could put my kid in an all-black school and everything. When they go out in the world, they're gonna have to see you, and they're gonna have the results of the people who believe ignorance like you do, going against them their entire lives. So if you want to come in and learn, that's all we asking for. Go ahead and do that. Build out those programs, get that like support, get that funding and everything, and be able to push that, because that's necessary. You're never gonna get turned away from an opportunity to learn as long as we approaching it right. We know the people who want to turn you away from the opportunity to learn.
Yep.
Thank you for tuning in and talking with us about education. It's very informative. Thank you both for your awesome feedback.
Of course.
Thanks for having us.
As we close out today's episode, we want to highlight the incredible work being done by the City Teaching Alliance in the field of education. Their commitment to fostering innovative solutions is crucial as we navigate the challenges our educational system faces. In today's roundtable discussion, we explore where we can go from here. We examine how we can fund and build educational systems ourselves, drawing inspiration from the Oakland Community School. We emphasize the role families can play in taking education into their own hands, empowering themselves and their children. As we move forward, let's carry these ideas with us and continue to advocate for meaningful change in education. Thanks for listening.
Why is it me, honey?